George Bush needed a Pearl Harbor and they wanted to blame it on Afghanistan. That was because of Berdosco. I'm the only person I know that met Berdosco Corporation in 1999. I knew what to look for over there. And that involved Turkmenistan, that involved Afghanistan, and also Pakistan. And the target was the port of Gwadar, Pakistan, in Balochistan province. During the USSR-Afghan War, Osama bin Laden was the head of the Mujahideen, which is now called Al-Qaeda. Anytime the United States wants to pull out a terror threat, it's always Al-Qaeda. But most people do not understand the United States created Al-Qaeda. It used to be called the Mujahideen. The Pentagon had a planning team trying to figure out how they could go in there, take part of Balochistan and take the Gwadar port back away from Pakistan and also China. And evidently there may be a few sane people in the Pentagon that probably told President Bush, oh, by the way, if we do this, we're going to be at war with Pakistan and also China, and we're going to be wiped out. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, 2 U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. We found corporate registrations in 16 states. And when you track all that down, you find the name, and then all of that points straight back to the World Trade Center, you know you're onto a trail. Okay, when the same names keep connecting over and over again.
How are the lawsuits from 1987 connected to what happened in 2001?
They lost an asbestos lawsuit of $6 billion. Basically, the World Trade Center was condemned.
Watch Federal Post. Bold and independent.
Hello, this is Hassan Zafar with Talking Politics. Today's guest is Karl Schwarz, a man who lives in oblivion. He is the author of One-Way Ticket to Crawford, Texas, a conservative Republican speaks out. He is the president and chief executive officer of Patmos Nanotechnologies, LLC, and OneNet Security Systems, a designer of intelligence and communications. So thank you very much, Karl, for joining me today. I would like to read something from your book, which you wrote, One-Way Ticket to Crawford, Texas, a conservative Republican speaks out. Here are two quotes from the book, which you have shared with me, actually. So the first one goes, Umar's words are reported by Hamed Mir, who made the last interview with Osama bin Laden, who declared that he is not against the American people, only the politicians and the state. In the first interviews, Osama bin Laden had declared himself against all the American people, but he had changed. He admitted that there were many good people in the United States, and it was the politicians and the state which he despised. He told Mir that he had seen many Western people on television protesting at the bombing in Afghanistan and concluded they are good people. They are not Muslims, but they condemned the bombing. And the second one is, which you have cited with permission from another author, from Little Rock AR, and this is where and why I drew the line on George W. Bush. It is not a pleasant thought or one that's often discussed, but lies are at base coercive. Deceit is a form of control. More than a few philosophers have compared the coercive force of lies to the power of violence. And so even if they are common, they are not as benign as people pretend. Lies undermine the value of information, each one leaving us less able to trust the truthfulness of what we hear or read. As the case may be, lies are more subtle than guns, but as threats to personal freedom, they should be regarded as no less dangerous. And Karl, let me tell people that you are the managing director of this company, Tokata Nanotech Group, and you are part of the team that has filed a lawsuit to reinvestigate the 9/11. And you're one of the lead members of that
We're
group.
going past reinvestigate. We're
Reinvestigate.
going past reinvestigate. Yeah, this is a RICO action. It has civil remedy. It's also bioterrorism with civil remedy. And there's about by who did 9/11. Now, one of the things we'll discuss tonight is I know that you know Dan Hanley very well. And his theory from day one has been those planes were not hijacked by Arab terrorists, Islamic terrorists. But there's something else out there that you and I didn't get a chance to cover the other night because we kept getting frozen on the internet. After 9/11 happened, there were about many lawsuits. There's like 30 families who were suing the two alleged flights from Boston, Flight 11 and Flight 175, the alleged hijacked jet, Americans Flight 77 from Dulles, and then the last one was Newark, Flight 93. The courts ordered every one of those airlines to provide what's called the final flight manifest. Now, just before they closed the door jet, and the jet's going to be backed away from the loading gate to go take off, they finally got their hands on those final manifests. There was not a single Arabic or Islamic person on those flights. Not one. Now, one of the things I focused on from day one, when I saw what happened, I had already been investigating this Berdas Corporation matter over in the Caspian Basin, all the way to the bottom of the barrel on that one. I also was watching the lawsuits that were in Texas, and then they went to New Orleans to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So well before 9/11, I was on a different trail than most of these 9/11 investigators. Now, thankfully, when I saw the molten metal coming out of that building, we went a different direction. And Richard Gage and his group, I don't know why it took so long, but they came to the same conclusion. All three towers were controlled demolitions. Now, my team was the first one to introduce what hit the Pentagon was not the Flight 77, a Boeing 757. Everybody's been talking about the lack of qualifications of Hanjur. What hit that building was actually an A3 Sky Warrior, and that's been proven not only by me, but many other people between 2001 and 2005. Now, a lot of people that are currently investigating, they missed that news. Okay?
Yes.
I mean, I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about me and people who were experts about that airplane. They have verified it all. There was one newspaper that verified it. They investigated it. They talked to everybody. I was 100% right. Now, just before we started this video, I told you that I wasn't going to challenge anything about what you and Barbara did, except one thing. Do you remember when you were asking her, how did the jet or the two jets penetrate solid concrete and steel and beams on the World Trade Center towers?
Yes, I remember that.
You remember?
Because we had in mind that jets, these Boeings, their noses are made of fiberglass. They are soft noses, so how could those soft noses penetrate reinforced concrete walls?
Well, actually, the noses of jets are made out of carbon fiber. It's really not fiberglass. It's a carbon composite. because the waves can pass straight through it. It's not fiberglass, but
Thanks for correcting that.
this,
But it's a soft material. It's
a very soft material.
Yes.
What is in that nose cone is all the sensors. And then there's some sensors that are on the wings and some sensors that are on top of the jet, kind of like your car. You know, the GPS on top of your car. You know, that's on the jet too. But the four walls of the World Trade Center had no structural concrete, they had no columns, and they had no beams. The structural design of that building was brilliant. Those four walls were suspended from the top, and those walls were transferred back to the superstructure. I had to study that superstructure when I was in architecture and engineering school. I could tell you, you could have crashed 5 jets into either one of those towers, and they would still be standing today, except there was a plan to destroy them so they could blame it on Afghanistan. Now, later in this interview, I'm going to tell you some things that are going on. You remember our first attempt, I told you about CPEC,
Yes.
Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and you mentioned the terrorism that was going on in Pakistan along that corridor. Well, tonight I'm going to provide you some more information, and you can check it out locally, okay?
Sure. But I want my viewers to understand that you are using a heavy VPN. That's why the audio video quality is suppressed in a way. So they need to bear with us.
That's why it was suppressed last time. Right now it's turned off, okay?
So they have to make a little effort to pay attention to what you are saying. And what you're saying is very important.
The interesting thing about my corporate email, and I've got 5 email addresses. The interesting thing about my corporate emails and also the VPN, they're out of Switzerland, and the United States, when I have the VP on, they can't even tell which nation I'm in. So right now they can, but the truth matters right now, okay?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I'm in Central Europe.
Okay.
But we touched on the last deal. George Bush needed a Pearl Harbor, and they wanted to blame it on Afghanistan. That was because of Bridas Corporation. I'm the only person I know that met Bridas Corporation in 1999. I knew what to look for over there, and that involved Turkmenistan, that involved Afghanistan, and also Pakistan. And the target was the port of Gwadar, Pakistan, in Balochistan province. But it goes 1 inch deeper than that. The other signatory party over in Afghanistan was General Rashid Dostum. He's an Uzbek holdover, and he's the one that controls the northern part of Afghanistan. And then 2 days before, and the most powerful warlord in northern Afghanistan was Ahmad Shah Massoud. And he was assassinated 2 days before 9/11 because he had already told Bush he was not welcome to come to Afghanistan. During the USSR Afghan War, Osama bin Laden was the head of the Mujahideen, which is now called Al-Qaeda. I mean, anytime the United States wants to pull out a terror threat, it's always Al-Qaeda. But most people do not understand the United States created Al-Qaeda. Used to be called the Mujahideen. And now, 2 days before 9/11, because of what happened in the Afghan-Russian war, Ahmad Shah Massoud was assassinated by a Jordanian crew that the United States had recruited. It was probably what they called the CIA Special Activities Division. The guy got the interview with him, his cameraman. That camera was a bomb. That's what suit. But he had already told Bush, "You're not welcome." Now, there were other people, and I do agree with Barbara Honegger on this. This is something we've been working on for years. CIA Special Activities Division, we believe, was in Afghanistan as early as June or July 2001, and who they were rounding up and putting in prison or killing them were the people that the U.S. knew were going to be adamantly opposed against the U.S. coming to Afghanistan. It was because of the Afghan-Russian war, okay? And it's what happened in that war. Now, one of the things that we tracked and we proved, CPEC, the Chinese Pakistan Economic Corridor, was signed in 2002. The port construction was finished in 2006, and the port was dedicated in 2007. And what I mean in saying that is that George Bush and Tony Blair knew in 2002 they had been blocked. They were not going to control the Gwadar port. That was exactly the port that Bardas wanted to go to. They already had agreements with Turkmenistan and General Rashid Dostum and the Taliban and Pakistan to do that pipeline. And Bush wanted it and decided to go try to steal it with military force. I mean, that's the bottom line. All evidence points to exactly that. And they created this fiasco in New York City and the Pentagon so they could launch that in Afghanistan. Now, with that said, in our last interview, when we tried to do it first time, I mentioned CPEC and the CPEC corridor, and you mentioned who the terrorists were going on in Pakistan against that corridor. I can guarantee
the gas pipeline you're talking about is the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, the Tapi gas pipeline. Is that what it was?
Well, the Tapi pipeline was after George Bush failed. I mean, basically, what they're trying to get done now is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. But I'm going to share with you a couple other things that popped up in our investigation. We knew about CPEC, and we knew how important Balochistan was, okay? Now, I got information straight out of D.C. that after they got blocked on the Gwadar thing, the Pentagon had a planning team trying to figure out how they could go in there and take part of Balochistan and take the Gwadar port back away from Pakistan and also China. And evidently, there may be a few sane people in the Pentagon. They probably told President Bush, "Oh, by the way, if we do this, we're going to be at war with Pakistan and also China, and we're going to be wiped out." And actually, they were right. But shortly after that, Iran was trying to get a pipeline across there. Now, if you back up and look into history, China has a $400 billion oil contract with Iran. The easiest way to get that to China is to go to Gwadar and go straight through Pakistan.
Yeah.
As soon as they tried to get that pipeline done, which was the, I think they called it the IPI, that was the Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline, the CIA was waging a covert war inside of Balochistan, Pakistan, and Balochistan, Iran. I mean, they were going way out of their way to block any pipeline, hoping that they could figure out how to get back in control. And as we all know now, the Taliban prevailed. The United States lost that war. I've been a firm believer all my life. If a nation lies to start a war, you set the hand of God against you and you're going to lose. And I've seen that in my life in Vietnam. I've seen it in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Serbia, again in Afghanistan, again in Iraq, and now Libya, Syria, and they're losing now in Ukraine.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question here, if you like. In our previous talk, you mentioned.
Okay.
In our previous talk, you mentioned that there were 3 or maybe 2 assassination attempts at you in Eastern and Central Europe. You were in Vienna and Budapest, if I correctly remember. So
no, they were actually two times in Budapest, and it was robbed in Berlin. Right. They stole the video that proves what
they stole the video, the evidence that you have of the aircraft that is this aircraft here, this article that you have shared with me from rense.com, rense.com, and the article title is 9/11 Pentagon and the A3 Sky Warrior 30. I'll read an excerpt from here. But before that, I want to ask you a question that may also arise in the minds of the people who are listening to this. You have taken this kind of risk to protect the story that you know, that you have the evidence of. And why would you do that? I mean, what's the worth of all this?
It's under U.S. law and also British law, okay? There's a concept called misprision of felony. If you know the truth and you don't speak it, and it comes out later that you knew, you could actually be charged with a felony. But to me, there were 3 bigger issues. First, I was infuriated that they murdered U.S. citizens and 372 citizens of 61 other nations to launch this bogus global war on terror. That was point 1. Point 2, I don't like liars. And when I see the machinations that they did and the evidence we have in our hands, I hope every one of them get either maximum sentences for the rest of their life, or they get hung or shot for what they did. I mean, this crime is that heinous. And then lastly, was how they tried to blame the entire Islamic world for something it didn't have anything to do with. I mean, Captain Dan Hanley has proved it his way. We proved it our way. The flight manifest, court ordered. Yeah. There was not one Arabic person on any of those 4 flights.
Yes, in the same way, and it becomes important for me personally because 2001, and I was a young man at that time, and we lived all our life with the burden of this lie that we have been involved in terrorism all over the world, as if being a Muslim is a crime in itself. And we spent all our life defending ourselves against something we had never done. And 15 of those hijackers, they were Saudis. And this man, Osama bin Laden, one day we learn happens to be in Abbottabad, 50 miles from Islamabad. And all this was very shocking. And the case was built against Pakistan, which our rival India took advantage of. And they continue to take that kind of advantage even today. You see this incident, a pure false flag. They have no evidence. They have not been able to present any evidence of Pakistan's involvement and see where we are. So that's what my
Exactly.
interpretation is in this whole story.
But let me add one more thing to what I was saying about the three reasons. I'm a Christian, and there's such a thing in Christianity. Christianity is what you call a sin of omission, and that basically means you were too cowardly to stand up for what's right. You wouldn't stand up for the truth, and that means you didn't break any U.S. law or international law. You broke God's law. And that's why I stood up. I stood up actually on September the 1st when I saw molten metal coming out of one of the Trade Center towers. I knew exactly what they had done. I had to study that structure when I was in architecture and engineering school. I knew that those four walls were not structural load bearing. The only way you can bring those buildings down is to destroy that inner core. And that's what they did. That inner core was the strongest thing I've ever seen designed. It was brilliant. But even those four walls, all it was the vertical, where you saw the shiny vertical, that was supposed to be stainless steel. I switched over to aluminum because it was cheaper. And that actually caused some problems over time called galvanic corrosion. And those were between the windows, but those were rectangular steel tubes. Those were not columns. And then horizontally, they had a plate, and that plate was ASTM 100,000 pounds per square inch. Steel. It wasn't that thick, but the only reason it was there to hold the bar joist and weld, there's a little angle iron where they weld the bar joist, so the floor, doesn't slide, it doesn't slip. But that right there, that whole wall, the top of the building, I had to redo every one of those calculations to understand how it worked. And basically, I had 2 years of structural steel design. We spent almost one semester just doing those calculations. I mean, it was a brilliant design. And yeah, a jet will go through that. It will penetrate because it's one thing, it's the speed and the weight. That will shear steel.
So you have calculated all that, the speed, the weight, and the strength of those columns and the steel.
Yeah, but there were no columns in the outside walls. It was rectangular tubes about this big, and they went to full height. And up at the top, it was almost, imagine a suspension bridge, and you have a cable that's holding up the bridge.
Yes.
Well, those rectangular tubes were the cable.
Okay. And this in which you have mentioned John Carlson of Chicago, which people confused, and you write John Carlson of Chicago and I are not the same person. You will be relieved to know that both of us are still investigating 9/11. You want to read this?
I had some government shills claiming that I was vetting myself by creating a fake name, John Carlson. And I was trying to explain in that article, John Carlson is in Chicago. I'm in Little Rock. We're two different people.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Let me read some of it. There have been some disinformation people like Stu Webb and Daryl Bradford Smith trying to spread the rumor that John is me and I am John, but that simply is not true. Some have even alleged that we write exactly alike, but that is not true either. John and I have collaborated on two things: the fact that number 757 hit the Pentagon, and the fact that 737 jets were used to hit the World Trade Center WTC towers, not the much larger 767 jets from Boston Logan. There
Yeah,
was,
and
in
see,
fact, 737 jet engine lying on the street of the intersection of Church and Vesey Streets, just northeast of the Twin Towers complex. That jet engine originated from the plane that hit the South Tower. What is this story?
okay, John Carlson is a former aerospace engineer. And when he started seeing my articles and he started backtracking and double and triple checking everything, he knew I was telling the truth. And then all of a sudden, when he chimed in, and actually about 5 other people, they also had experience in aerospace. Some of them had direct experience with an A3 Skywarrior. Some of them actually maintained 737s, 767s. You know, they know what the difference in the size of the jet engines are. And this is when I started getting attacked. Oh my God, Carl Schwartz is John Carlson, and he's trying to vet himself. You know, this is the type of stupid crap that was going on back then. U.S. government people trying to kill any attempt to push through with the truth. Now, one of the things that has happened, the architect engineers for 9/11 Truth, I don't know why it took them so long, but they have completely corroborated everything that I knew and everything I said years ago. I'm talking about 20 years ago. So Richard Gage, you need to interview him because he knows what he's talking about.
I am going to interview Richard Gage. Yes.
Yeah, I talked to him. Dan and I talked to him. I think 3 days ago. You know, I'm not hostile with A&E at all. I'm trying to figure out what the International Center for 9/11 Truth is doing. But I think over time they'll come along. Dan's group has already teamed up with me. The firefighters in New York are already teaming up with us. And there's quite a few of the families. I'm talking about the people who lost their husbands or wives or their sons or daughters at World Trade Center. They're starting to come to us. Now, until this video is posted, I'm not contacting your government, but Pakistan lost 6 people. And I want them to see this video. So when I contact them, I'm going to send it directly to your top ministers in 3 places and say, hey, I'm talking to one of your neighbors, one of your citizens. This is the truth. And this is why we're going to court. You're welcome to join us as a Group A plaintiff. I've got some nations already discussing with me. Some of them, it's incredibly hard to figure out whether you need to talk to the Justice Ministry or the Foreign Ministry. I mean, every nation has their own laws, their own rules. They have their own ways of doing things. So I've been sorting through that for the last month. You know, who to talk to. And if they care about their own citizens, I mean, like UK lost 67. Dominican Republic lost 47. Japan lost 24. There was 4 banks in the World Trade Center that basically took a jet right in their face. And that was Mitsui Bank, which is now Sumitomo Mitsui Bank, and also Nishi Nippon Bank. That was in World Trade Center North Tower. And the South Tower, one company, Mizuno Financial, they lost 19 people. I mean, they took a jet right into their office.
Yeah.
You know, this is the type of stuff I care about. Now, one of the things I'd like to see some of these 9/11 groups focus on is, do they give a damn about how many people died? Because what happened that day has changed everybody's life for the last 24 years.
No, when people listen to this story, and from the previous 2 interviews I've conducted, one with Dan and one with Barbara, one common question that comes up, I've seen the feedback, that these are conspiracy theories. So this version of truth or this truth or the truth is hard to digest for the people when Netflix has recently released a series on 9/11 and the official truth about 9/11. And when we post this video on YouTube, the Wikipedia 9/11 story, the official story pops up and attaches itself to the video automatically. So in this kind of environment, how is this truth going to matter?
Well, our approach to this whole thing has not been research. It hasn't been doing videos or documentaries. Our approach to this, we have enough evidence to go to court, put this before a court and a jury, and actually bring the people to justice that did this. I sent an email yesterday to just a few people. That was Richard Gage, his wife, because she screens his emails, Barbara Honegger and Dan Hanley. There's only three key issues here. Why did they do it? How did they do it? And then who did it? And that's been our investigation ever since 9/11. It's been a tedious path. We've had to really dive deep to get to some of the evidence. Because when you see a government in cover-up, they will create however many lies they need to avoid being detected.
Yeah.
And I mean, just within the U.S., I'm just going to name the states. These are lawsuits that we found. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, 2 U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. We found corporate registrations in 16 states.
Mm-hmm.
And when you track all that down and you find the names, and then all of that points straight back to the World Trade Center, you know you're onto a trail, okay? When the same names keep connecting over and over again, and it all points
in all
back
these states. In all these states where you have filed the lawsuit, the same names pop up every time and they are connected.
No, these were other lawsuits. Some of these lawsuits go back to 1987. For example, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, they lost 3 lawsuits between 1987 and May 17th, 2001.
Okay.
And another state.
How are the lawsuits from 1987 connected to what happened in 2001?
They lost an asbestos lawsuit of $6 billion. Basically, the World Trade Center was condemned.
Okay, but what was happening in 1987? That was fairly 14 years before it actually happened.
Well, the first lawsuit was Port Authority, New York, New Jersey versus Allied Corp, and it was about the asbestos. Okay.
Okay.
The second lawsuit was filed. That was in state court, New Jersey. But let me fill in a few back channel things that you could actually check in your own neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we tried to do this, we were talking about CPEC, and we were talking about all the terrorism that all of a sudden popped up in your face over there along that Pakistan corridor.
Yes.
And tonight we've discussed the IPI, which was Iran trying to get oil to Gudar, and they were also trying to get energy to Pakistan and India, what they call the IPI. And who's been behind this constant barrage and constant terrorism and constant pushback has been the United States.
Right. This is the first part of your interview with us. The second part will be published later. So those who are watching this part today should be following the next part to complete the full picture. Thank you very much, Carl, for joining me.